venga.
Huh?
Hi, here.
Hi, Margarita.
Hi.
Okay.
Speak Spanish? You?
Oh.
Hmm?
Ah, yes.
My conference is in Spanish.
Okay. Hi, Margarita.
Hi.
No, Margarita is here. I didn't know. Okay, let's get started normally with advances in the implementation of UN program to improve genetic trucha arcoiris, okay, using molecular markers. Interesting. In Ecuador. Okay. Let's go. 3 guys. I don't know if we have 2 hours, but let's get let's follow 20 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes is good. It's enough to a good presentation. More than this is this person. Okay, thank you. Let's go.
¿Inicio? ¿Sí? Yeah. Buenos días, estimada audiencia. Mi nombre es Margarita Rivera. Mi tema de exposición es avances en la implementación de un programa de mejora genética de trucha arcoíris asistido con marcadores moleculares con enfoque a la acuicultura de pequeña escala en Ecuador. Estamos hablando de las fases 1 y 2 del proyecto. En Ecuador, la actividad de trucha arcoíris se está desarrollando de manera creciente. Esto lo podemos evidenciar en las figuras que he colocado, donde observamos que para el año 2017 se produjeron más de 6,000 toneladas de esta especie en el país, lo que hace que la trucha arcoíris se posicione como la segunda especie más producida en aguas continentales de nuestro país, solo después de la tilapia. De acuerdo con un último censo que se realizó por la Subsecretaría de Acuacultura del Ecuador en el año 2003, se constataba que para esa época habían alrededor de 400 criaderos de peces de distintas especies en agua dulce. Sin embargo, de estos, 250 pertenecieron a la producción de trucha arcoíris. Es así que en beneficio de las comunidades rurales, se mantienen hasta ahora 2 estaciones públicas que se dedican a apoyar la actividad de producción de trucha en la región andina del Ecuador. Cabe recalcar que estas instalaciones fueron creadas con un enfoque productivo y también de beneficio social, y se les colabora a las comunidades a través de dotaciones de semilla en ovas y alevines de esta especie y también a través de ventas. ¿Cuál es el problema que teníamos inicialmente? La población base de reproductores que teníamos en las instalaciones fue creada a partir de especímenes silvestres y también por parte de ovas importadas. Durante 20 años, lastimosamente en la estación no se manejaba con tanto criterio técnico lo que son los cruces de los reproductores, lo que llevó a ciertas implicaciones negativas y también principalmente se hacían las selecciones de los reproductores para la reproducción solo en base a su fenotipo, es decir, en base a su peso, longitud, etc. Esto fue generando, como les mencioné, diversas consecuencias negativas, como la pérdida de vigor genético, tasas de crecimiento bajas, retraso de procesos productivos o tasas de deformidad. En la imagen nosotros estamos viendo porcentajes de deformidades que si bien no son altos, ya están presentes, estaban presentes en la población cuando se realizó la selección. Y en las fotografías podemos evidenciar ciertas deformidades que se presentaban en los alevines para esa época. ¿Qué es lo que estamos buscando con este programa? Bueno, implementar un programa de mejora genética para trucha andina en Ecuador, como les mencioné, con enfoque a la acuicultura de pequeña escala. Esto con la finalidad de contribuir como una fuente alternativa de alimentación para comunidades rurales, pero también en beneficio económico de estas comunidades a través de una mejor dotación de semillas de buena calidad, que es en lo que se enfoca las estaciones de producción de la subsecretaría. Este trabajo se ha llevado a cabo en convenio tripartito con la Universidad de las Fuerzas Armadas del Ecuador, el Centro de Investigaciones Acuícolas del Ecuador y la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso de Chile. Como vemos en las imágenes, son los lugares de investigación. Estas son nuestras instalaciones del Centro de Investigaciones Acuícolas en el Ecuador, en Papayacta. Y aquí en las dos imágenes podemos evidenciar la carrera de Ingeniería Agropecuaria y ASA 1 de la Universidad de las Fuerzas Armadas del Ecuador. En lo que respecta a metodología, ¿cómo hemos avanzado con el proyecto? Hemos determinado dos fases, una de campo y una de laboratorio. En la fase de campo, lo que nos preocupamos en primeras instancias es en determinar si había una variabilidad genética de la población de reproductores para que podamos partir de ellos en los siguientes cruces. Cuando realizamos la selección masal de la población total de los reproductores de trucha de la estación, pudimos seleccionar un grupo de animales, de exactamente 80 animales, para formar posteriormente 50 familias de trucha arcoíris que ya contaron con su registro de datos en lo que respecta a fenotipos y otros. A partir de esos reproductores, como les mencioné, se hicieron los desoves y posteriormente se clasificaron en diferentes compartimentos separados por cada familia, como lo observamos en las imágenes, realizándose los procesos de incubación y hasta el crecimiento. Y también contando con los registros de medición. ¿Y qué hicimos ya en la fase de laboratorio? Se obtuvieron muestras de la aleta dorsal de estos peces para la extracción del ADN y su consecuente evaluación en calidad y cantidad. Posteriormente se hizo un genotipado, una secuenciación, para que nosotros podamos evaluar a través de marcadores moleculares la variabilidad genética presente en esta población. Y les he colocado aquí esta tabla con pequeñas secuencias de algunos marcadores que ya han sido estudiados y publicados en lo que respecta a variabilidad genética de trucha arcoíris. Y en esta imagen lo que podemos evidenciar es un ejemplo de la genotipificación que se llevó a cabo en el laboratorio en geles de poliacrilamida de uno de los marcadores que constan en esta tabla. Posteriormente se realizó esta tabla que tiene todos los parámetros que se pueden apreciar para determinar si existe una variabilidad genética adecuada en la población y con eso ya se pudo partir el programa. Entonces nosotros estamos observando en esta tabla el número de alelos que se presentó en la población, el número efectivo de estos alelos, que quiere decir que aquí se está haciendo una corrección con aquellos alelos que se presentaron en muy bajas frecuencias en la población, las heterocigosidades, que quiere decir cuántos heterocigotos se presentaron en la población, tanto la observada como la que se espera en un tipo de estas poblaciones, a través de correcciones en programas que manejan la estadística genética. También estamos colocando el índice de consanguinidad y un parámetro muy importante respecto del equilibrio de la variabilidad en estas poblaciones, como es el equilibrio de Hardy-Weinberg. De acuerdo a esta tabla, nosotros podemos constatar que el tercer marcador que empleamos es mayormente polimórfico, ya que tiene mayor cantidad de alelos. Tiene una cantidad de alelos de 17. Y de los demás valores, por ejemplo, en las heterocigosidades, podemos destacar que están sobre 0.5. Esto quiere decir que sí se mantiene una variabilidad en las poblaciones. Respecto del equilibrio de Hardy-Weinberg, podemos constatar que hubieron diferencias en el equilibrio, ligeras diferencias en el equilibrio de variabilidad, pero sin embargo estamos constatando que con la consanguinidad también está manteniéndose valores bajos y con estos valores en general podemos constatar que efectivamente se mantiene una variabilidad adecuada para utilizar estos reproductores en el programa de mejora genética y a partir de ellos ir generando un registro común de las nuevas generaciones que se están creando en el programa. Cuando realizamos el estudio de variabilidad genética, efectivamente, monitoreamos las 50 familias que se formaron inicialmente, pero en base a esas, nosotros destacamos aquellas que presentaban mejor peso, mejor longitud, mejor índice de condición corporal, y mediante un análisis estadístico y de componentes principales y otros, pudimos determinar que de esas 50 familias, únicamente las que constan aquí cumplían con los parámetros para poder seguir adelante en el programa de mejora genética. Es así que para el año 2018, cuando inició este programa, se formó el núcleo genético con las pocas familias que fueron seleccionadas de acuerdo a sus fenotipos. Entonces, en la imagen vemos el núcleo genético de Papachaca, donde se encuentra la estación CENIAC, con las familias a las que se ha denominado F0, a partir de las cuales se van tomando registros continuos hasta la actualidad. En esta imagen, en cambio, vemos el núcleo genético en el 2020, que son los animales que provienen del núcleo genético anterior. Es decir, estos animales llegaron a reproducción y ahora sí vamos a tener un registro de sus hijos. Por lo tanto, se sigue formando aquí las familias. Lo que podemos constatar en esta imagen son tinas individuales para cada familia, donde se colocan las ovas para su respectiva eclosión y contar con los registros de fenotipos de los alevines. Y aquí, pues, en el exterior ya tenemos los alevines que eclosionaron y que son, están en un estadio más grande y que pasan de aquí al ambiente natural. A estas poblaciones, a estas familias las hemos denominado F1 y se espera que con ellas se puedan realizar ya a futuro el etiquetado con chips y posteriormente los análisis moleculares, pero se espera poder realizar los análisis en cuanto a crecimiento, que es el valor comercial de mayor apreciación en este tipo de producciones. Y de esta manera podremos también a futuro dotar a las comunidades rurales de semilla de buena calidad, puesto que los animales han pasado por un proceso de selección adecuado. Quisiera agradecer a las 3 instituciones que han venido formando parte de este proyecto, a la Universidad de las Fuerzas Armadas del Ecuador, a la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso en Chile, que ha colaborado con todo lo que son los análisis moleculares hasta la actualidad, y al Centro de Investigaciones Acuícolas, donde actualmente se sigue llevando a cabo el proyecto. Eso sería todo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Usted fue muy rápida.
Ajá, me dijeron 10 minutos.
Okay. No, okay. 20 minutes. Okay, but okay.
20.
Well, was very clear. I remember I'm an agronomist, so I had the opportunity to remember a little bit genetics. Okay, thank you. So we're going to Paula. Okay, Paula.
Yes. I prepared my presentation in English. I apologize. I don't know if there was like a language or whatever, but
Well, today we I don't know. We don't know what is the audience. So
no,
the official language of the conference is English. Okay.
All right. Give me 1 second.
We have 13 participants. So some of them could be only English speakers.
Can you guys see my screen? I don't know what I am presenting.
It's correct.
Oh, okay, great. Just 1 second. All right. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to get my I'm just to stop my video just in case I have connection issues, but I'm going to be here. My name is Paula Achenbach. I will be presenting the paper called Looking for a Double Dividend of a Carbon Tax in Argentina using an input-output model. The original idea was for my bachelor's thesis, and with my mentors Priscila Ramos and Carlos Romero, we've written this paper. This is my first presentation, so I just want to clarify that if I seem nervous, it's because I am. So this presentation is structured as follows. First, I will be introducing the subject matter, particularly where Argentina stands regarding climate change, along with its responsibilities and commitments. Then I will be explaining our methodological approach, our sources of information, and the way we transform the data to be used. And after that, I will briefly show the results of the simulations to close with the conclusions we've arrived to. So, beginning with the introduction. So as we know, Argentina is a developing country who is not really that responsible for the consequences that climate change brings nowadays. In fact, in 2017, greenhouse gases emissions reached 368 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is only 0.5% of worldwide emissions. However, our greenhouse gases emissions per capita are above world's average. In this show in particular, we focus on CO2 emissions, which represent around 60% of total greenhouse gases emissions. In here, we can see the figure on the left, which shows the positive relationship between Argentina's GDP and CO2 emissions in the period that goes from 1990 to 2015, which is our scope. We can see that there are peaks in emissions when GDP increases and then falls during economic crisis. Also, this gray line represents an index of carbon intensity with base on 1990, which is actually falling during the period. This might be a sign of a weak decoupling of emissions here up until beginning in 2005. And this can be either due to technological change or a shift in production or consumption patterns. Then, the information of CO2 emissions that we possess was divided between emissions that come from the consumption of goods and services, which could have been emitted in Argentina or not, and then from production, locally consumed or exported. We can see here that both variables have a very similar evolution during the period in analysis. Here, in this slide, we can see two different figures that show the evolution between domestic in here, and we can see imported emissions here and exported emissions in here. Up until the year 2000, we can see that imported emissions were proportionally higher than exported emissions. However, by the end of the period, the latter became more important. We can also, well, it's worth mentioning that in both cases, the productive sectors that have a greatest share of CO2 emission are transport and electricity, gas, and water. So, regarding what the country has already implemented to mitigate climate change, we can mention these policies. We have the reduction of subsidy programs for the energy consumption, policies of zero deforestation, and projects to promote the use of renewable energies in rural areas. However, we know that climate change continues to be a global threat, so these measures are really not that enough to generate the appropriate incentives. So the government needs to explore further alternatives. All that being said, the motivation of this paper was to investigate different public policies that can help deal with the externality that climate change represents. In consequence, we seek to analyze the impact of the introduction of a carbon tax in the Argentine economy and also test whether a double dividend can exist. So, the double dividend hypothesis states that while punishing activities that pollute with a carbon tax, but also reinserting the revenue of that tax back into the economy, then there can exist both a positive impact in the economy and in the environment at the same time. So, the methodology of this paper is based on an input-output model, which I will explain first, and then I will...
Sorry to interrupt, but we have time today. May you explain the double dividend, because this is, I don't know if it's a new idea, but it's an important idea. If you can explain it, it's interesting.
Sure. I said something before, though. It's basically, we have to introduce a carbon tax in the economy, but then we use that revenue, we reinsert it into the economy. I'm going to mention our scenarios later on. And by introducing the revenue back, then we can have a positive effect in the economy and in the environment at the same time, because we're trying to reduce emissions. I don't know if I made myself clear.
Thanks.
All right. Okay, then I will briefly explain the simulation scenarios of this investigation, where we prepare different recycling of the revenues. So, in order to carry out the input-output model, we use as a base the social accounting matrix for Argentina for the year 2015, which we follow the methodology in Mastronardi et al. From 2017. Then we retrieve information from CO2 emissions and employment from Ramos and Romero, which is a forthcoming paper. Then we had to match these sources of information, and for that, we aggregated into 21 productive sectors. And on the other side, we had the final demand that came from the accounts of household, government, and rest of the world. Once the input matrix is ready, then we proceeded to calculate the technical coefficient matrix and the DNTF matrix as in a regular input-output model. But in order to simulate the introduction of a tax in the economy, we had to choose the model in prices. And for this, we followed the methodology in Zhang et al. 2019. So the carbon tax creates a new price vector, which assuming, unitary elasticity, it translates into a change in quantities. And based on the new sectoral outputs, we can measure the effects of the tax on emissions, GDP, and employment levels. So, as I wrote here, the introduction of this tax in the economy was made based on the CO2 emission intensity per unit of production of each productive sector. Here I wrote some of the most important equations that we use in order to calculate the new price vector, which here includes the tax per productive sector, and then the new outputs, emissions, and value added after the tax. So, before describing the simulation scenarios, I would like to mention the difference between the open and the closed input-output model. So in order to capture the impact of the increase in household income as a result of increased production, we need to close the model and consider as endogenous both household income and consumption. Otherwise, the open model treats final demand as exogenous, so the income increase is not reflected in additional demand. So we ran two sets of simulation. The first one, which is this one, was focused on calculating different carbon tax values to achieve a particular target of reduction of CO2 emissions. In this case, these objectives were -5, -10, and -15%. And for the simulation, we used the open model. The second set of simulation aims at testing the double dividend hypothesis. So we took as reference the value of the tax that results in a reduction in CO2 emissions of 15%. And then we constructed three different tax recycling scenarios. So going back to the definition of the double dividend, we need to reinsert the revenue somehow. So we made these three scenarios. First of all, we have no recycling, and then we compare it to the case where the recycling is made through direct transfers to household, and a third one, that recycling goes to reducing the labor tax burden. Also, we took 15% as a target of emission reduction because here in the Paris Agreement, Argentina committed to reduce projected emissions in that percentage by the year 2030. So after presenting everything, I would like to share the results with you. In the first simulation, where we calculated the values of the tax to achieve our targets of emissions, the conclusions are pretty straightforward. Introducing a carbon tax produces a negative effect in the economy, which leads to a drop in the GDP and gross output. And also, the higher the value of the tax, the bigger was the fall on both indicators. So here we have the emission reduction targets and the value of the tax value per ton in pesos. So for the next simulation, to test the double dividend hypothesis, we use this value of tax, which nowadays would be around $25 to $30. This was on 2015. So here, just to recall, for this simulation, we use the closed model. And this figure shows the results of the scenarios where there's no revenue, where there's no recycle, and where the recycle is made through direct transfers to household, both compared to the business as usual. So we can see in this case that in both cases, all variables drop. However, when there's a recycle somehow in here by direct transfers to household, we can see that there's a rebound effect because the recycling increases income on the side of the final demand, which causes a multiplier effect in the economy, and that compensates in some way the regressive and recessive nature of the tax. This happens because we are using the closed model, which treats consumption as endogenous. So up until here, we don't have any evidence of a double dividend, because in order for that to happen, we need that one of these variables shows a positive evolution. So, however, when we reduce the tax burden on labor, we can see that gross output here and employment levels show a small increase. So this in fact proves the existence of a small labor double dividend. We have an improvement in the environment because we reduce emissions, and in the labor side of the economy, we have a positive evolution. It happens both effects at the same time. It's also worth mentioning that the existence of the double dividend strongly depends on the relative inefficiency between the carbon tax that is being introduced and the one we're taking out or reducing. So, our basic idea was to analyze the effect on the economy when introducing a carbon tax and to test whether a double dividend can happen in Argentina. Our results show that a labor double dividend can be achieved. However, we have some of the well-known limitations of input-output models, which are the fact that it assumes a linear production function and constant technical coefficients, also an homogeneous pricing system, and it is a static model which cannot really predict innovations. And finally, the model is not completely able to represent structural problems that come from Argentina being a developing country, with a large informal sector, barriers to the entry of capital, and institutional and regulatory uncertainty. I would like to mention some future extensions. With all these limitations of the input-output models can be overcome with a CGE model or a dynamic input-output model. And on the other side, a broader or deeper study can include differentiating the household account into different income levels and simulating direct transfers to sectors with lower income. And we can also have other types of recycling, such as production subsidies or investment programs towards greener habits. So that was it. I hope you liked it. And questions, comments, and suggestions are more than welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay, you are so fast.
I'm so sorry.
I'm very efficient guys today. And I hope you have time to discuss, because all the presentations are excellent.
Stop share.
Thank you for
there you go.
Very interesting presentation.
Thank you guys for
I want to know other aspects about this. Now is Tamara.
Yes, I am here.
Okay. So Tamara, let's go.
Yes, do you see there? Can you see?
We can see it. Yes.
Okay. Hello, I am Tamara Hacheki. I am a food engineer. I job in University of Chaco Austral in Argentina, and I a doctoral student, PhD student in University Nacional of Lomas de Zamora. Well, my job is about the relevance of clusterization for productive regional development using bioeconomy tools. The bioeconomy is a particular and different way of understand the economy. We can see in all the conference there. And being part of the new knowledge economies, in addition to the circular and the bioeconomy, and considering aspects that were not previously taken into account and incorporating them as new paradigms. Beyond the widely used concept of meeting the needs, is a new taking into account that are there the real needs and that do not imply or damage or deteriorate the environment and society in your daily life collaboration with the productive ecosystem of regeneration and responsible use of the resource. The goal in this is to characterize regional cluster from the bioeconomy point of view to encourage local economy development and productivity. The application case is in the region Chaco Austral. The region of Chaco is in the include Argentina, Paraguay, and Bolivia, and a little part of Brazil. We know the clusterization include a lot of characteristics. There are geographic concentration, generation of specialization and job opportunities, generation of innovation and competition, knowledge generation, regional development, and that all with public politics, and the state acts as a catalyst. Enable positive results. The background, we know the European Commission, the studies cases in Asia, Europe, Africa, and America. When all see there in the conference, and state organizations and ministers and secretaries of agriculture in many countries. There is a international bioeconomy policy, and we can see in the countries with more or less development in the bioeconomy. The possible bioeconomy application in Chaco Austral region. We have a little, a few industries, and the biofuels, biodiversity, food industry, production of organic cotton and oilseeds, beekeeping and honey industry, rural and ecotourism, and biopharmaceutical industries. There are the possible industries whose development in the region. Chaco Austral is in the south of Argentina, in the south of the Chaco and north of Argentina. We can see taking into account the applications and tools of the bioeconomy, thus clustering contributes effectively and in what way to the productive development of the Chaco Coastal region? This is the question. Many elements of clustering may be used for bioeconomy to take an increase in productive development. We are studying this hypothesis by conducting field studies, interviews, and surveys. Thank you very much. Sorry for my English.
Thank you, Tamara. Excellent. Okay. We have only 3 speakers, and all of them is necessarily, you know, from my point of view, run a lot. Tamara, if you need to shut your presentation, please.
Yes.
Okay. So we are open to questions. I have one to Paula. You mentioned decoupling. The first one is this. What are the main regions of decoupling in Argentina? The second is, if I understood, what we could, if you have a carbon tax and you collect it, what would be the alternatives to use it? Because you mentioned this one is a kind of the similar to Brazil, that's Bolsa Familia. And then you have this rebound effect. You mentioned that it's possible to have a rebound effect in terms of, but the second, a little bit, you mentioned this caveat, the fact that you can incentive kind of circular energy use for this kind of population. Reducing the emissions and reducing the dimension of the rebound effect. But you mentioned this kind of model is difficult to change you have the input-output matrix, that is the reality. So change the coefficients is not easy, but you mentioned that you intend to do a dynamic aspect. But my question is, if you don't decide not to give them to the poor, what are you going to do with this grant collected by taxes?
Well, you can use it for anything that the government wants to. I mean,
but in relation to the rebound effect, that's the fact.
Well, the third scenario that we propose,
for example, debt, reduced debt, public debt, it's possible. So one measure
sure, exactly.
Don't have GAG effects.
Yeah, I know. I mean, in here we have a rebound effect because our measures to recycle the revenue, like they increase the income of households in both cases, like transferring to direct transfers to households and reducing labor tax. So in that case, final demand increases, and then we see that the target of emission reductions in the end is not really the one that we wanted, because we have this rebound effect. Yes, of course, you can use that for anything you want, but if the government, I mean, the idea of the double dividend is to have this positive. Well, you can also make the analysis to analyze public debt and to see if you have that positive effect there as well. I don't know if I answered your question. I mean, of course, you can use it.
Your paper is a little bit of critics on this kind of measure because, for example, taking that Calpray saw, I think it was a presentation about RenovaBio, and was a little bit skeptical about the cost of this. But in case of RenovaBio, we used a process to incentive innovation and a reduction of emissions on the sources, the main sources of emission. So you have the same consumption of fuels, okay, but you have a more consumption of advanced fuels that reduce emissions. Okay. So if I understood your presentation, it's a little bit of critics on this kind of measure trying to reduce emissions.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? We have 3 presentations. I don't want the one guy making questions.
I had a question for Margarita. If she, so Margarita, I'm going to ask it in English and then I'm going to ask it in Spanish too. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about the history of how Ecuador has gotten to the point where it can actually now genetically aid in the development of the fish species that you're working with molecular markers. That's pretty remarkable technology that's being done down there. Así que Margarita, no sé si me entendés un poco mejor si te hablo así en castellano. Yo tengo una curiosidad, si puedes platicar un poquito más acerca de cómo Ecuador ha llegado a ese nivel, donde puede asistir en el desarrollo, ¿no?, de la trucha con marcadores moleculares. ¿Cuánto tiempo ha sido? Si esto ya es algo que viene desde hace décadas, que viene trabajando, ¿ha sido reciente? ¿Cómo ha sido esa historia? Y no sé si es posible, perdón que te interrumpa, si es posible, no sé si puedes dar una breve explicación en inglés para todos los participantes. So, brief English explanation for everybody.
Sorry, my English is not so good as you, but the history of these molecular markets in Ecuador is so recently, no more of 20 years. And moreover, this project is the first in Ecuador with this technology. There is an information about projects of this kind in my country, but in other occasions, for example, there are other investigations that apply molecular markets in the analysis of genetic variability in other species, but moreover, but for example, in cows, in sheep, but not in aquaculture, because this is a new technology in my country. Yes, no.
Thank you. No, thank you. So just for everybody, the microphones are now open. Anybody can ask a question, and I encourage everybody to do so.
Okay, thank you. Can I am sorry, I am Maria Priscila Ramos. I am working also with Paula Achenbach, and only just a comment concerning her presentation and the comment question from Jose Maria is that the model we use is calibrated for a year, for 2015, and since we simulated carbon tax, the carbon tax is affect differently each good price in the model. So we have changes in relative prices between goods. So goods which are relatively intensive in carbon emissions become really more expensive, as so household and also sectors switch their consumption to less polluting products. And that's the reason why we have a double dividend effect when we change the recycling to lower labor taxes, because we become less expensive those products which are labor intensive, because we reduce labor taxes, and products which are carbon intensive become relatively more expensive. So this change in relative prices induce changes in consumption patterns, and that's why we have the reduction in carbon emissions. At the same time, we have increase in employment and in production at the national level. For sure, we have to look at the very detail at the sector level and the consumption pattern of household if we want to see where are the specific impact at which product level. But to provide you an idea how the model works and why we have this double dividend, it is because of this change in relative prices of products and we are incentive more those the production and the consumption of those goods which are more intensive in labor, which become less expensive than those products intensive in carbon. I think it is better explanation or more clear.
Yes, I understood this, but my only point, is there are some positive effects, as you mentioned, but the fact that you put more money in, you give some part of this money to the poor population or to households. In this case, it's not poor population. It's just,
no, it's all household. That's why we don't have an income distribution effect.
Yeah, you mentioned this. It's very difficult to take in account, but it's important. Is the structure of inequalities in case of
Brazil. In the case of Brazil, we have seen a work. I think it is Moderator, and it is I don't remember exactly the year of the paper, and it focus on this double dividend between the reduction in emissions, in carbon emissions, and improving income distribution. And the recycling of the tax is go through transfer to poor household. It is possible to do at the same time in Argentina. We have data, we have household information cut by deciles of income. So it could be possible to do that and see how that changed, particularly because poor household have a different pattern of consumption where food may be more important than other, which it could be more intensive in carbon emissions.
Yeah, I think that your explanation, both are a very excellent explanation. And that is important work because when we present the Renova framework, people don't understand these points, this kind of importance of the effect on the technological change, but only this effect on the relative prices driving to a less pollutant economy. They don't get it. They said, oh, it's some money. Who's going to stand for? Who's going to pay for this? And, okay, but
in fact, decoupling it could be for two reasons. Decoupling between emissions and GDP. One, changes in consumption patterns and production patterns that come particularly from the change in relative prices from inputs or from goods in the case of consumption, and also for technological change. But since we don't have a dynamic model, we put that technological change as an exogenous shock. We don't have that. So in that case, we need a dynamic model that could be an input-output model of a CGI model. Could be better to model and to take into account the change in technology.
Okay, but if I understood, this carbon tax doesn't exist anymore up till now.
Okay, it's very low. It was introduced at the end of 2017 with an equivalent of $10, but it was not a new tax. It was a change of the name of a tax, because before it was a fuel tax, and they changed the name of carbon tax, only applied on fuel energy. And now the discussion is larger because we are thinking to increase the amount of the tax and also to cover other sectors like agriculture, which are also more intensive in land use and deforestation, and could impact also on that impact really on emissions, on greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, another suggestion is to take to evaluate different policies. Okay.
Yes, and also subsidies. Yes, reducing subsidies on energy.
Other questions, the preference. I think that the excellent job from people from Argentina, but we have other papers with excellent presentation, Argentina too, and Ecuador or Chile. Do you have questions for them, please?
In my case, I would like to know, I am interested on Margarita's work because she presented that the case of the trucha, and I am interested to know how much does it cost for producers in Ecuador to meet the international standards concerning traceability and labels that would accept or better value this product in the international markets. There are different standards that they had met in different markets, like, for example, European market, United States, or others. And it is costly for them to assume this cost or not.
I don't understand.
Maybe the question is more economics than agronomy, or but I don't know if you know.
Do you
Margarita, te lo puedo decir en castellano si quieres.
Yes.
¿Sí? ¿Mejor? Mejor. No, digamos, mi interés está relacionado quizás con todo el costo que tiene todo el proceso de trazabilidad de la producción, ¿no? de trucha y del etiquetado, ¿sí? Que quizás muchos mercados internacionales piden para que Ecuador pueda exportar. Si eso representa un costo importante para los productores y si vale la pena realmente incurrir en ese costo para, no sé, acercarse a mercados europeos, por ejemplo, que suelen ser muy exigentes en términos de etiquetas o de procesos de trazabilidad.
Ya, no sé si igual respondo en inglés como para que todos traten de entenderlo.
Como te sientas cómoda, por mí no hay problema.
Ya. Realmente este proyecto está enfocado a la acuicultura de pequeña escala y para tratar de ayudar a productores rurales, en comunidades rurales, alejadas. En Ecuador no se hacen procesos de exportación de esta especie a gran escala a menos que hay empresas privadas que se dedican a esa actividad. Lo que nosotros estamos buscando fortalecer es las redes de cooperación académica y también la vinculación comunitaria. Entonces, en nuestro afán es incrementar la producción de ovas y alevines, porque sí es una actividad que recientemente ha crecido mucho en nuestro país y que la cantidad de productores también ha incrementado consecuentemente. Entonces, más bien no nos estamos enfocando a un mercado extranjero, pero sí a una producción que sea sostenible en estas comunidades y que les colabore en cuanto a nutrición, etcétera. Adicional y con economía para esas comunidades. Y adicionalmente, queremos crear estas redes de cooperación con la academia, porque lastimosamente en nuestro país la investigación es un poco dejada de lado, especialmente en este campo de la acuicultura. Es lo que respondería un poco la pregunta.
Ok, muchas gracias, Margarita. Era simplemente curiosidad para saber. Gracias.
Gracias a las dos por excelentes cuestiones. ¿Hay cuestiones más? Yo tengo una, Tamara, que es exactamente usted está... let's try to speak in English. It's a cold suit. And I think that my Spanish is the worst than English. But you mentioned this cluster, the clusterization of this economy. But I think that I studied with Cenici, it's a kind of consultancy service, the cotton in Chaco. And then
Yes.
one of the criticism is about the fact that government provides the seeds. Some policies are there's some mediation of local politics. They have some interference and then in the market, and then this resulted in some problems. If I remember, I think that's 7 years ago. And then what is the current status of cotton and organic cotton? What are the advantages of organic cotton, and how can this? What is the main is the production that can drives the development of the clusters and can act as a spark of the of the clustering process.
And now are incentivization the productivity of the cotton. A few years ago, the production was a little and worse production, but the last 3 or 4 years, the production was increased, and the politics are the major, and the little producers job with the cooperatives, and that is the clustering in the INTA is an institution national of technologies agropecuaries, work in the production the organics cotton, and this is a product with a future special. Is clear?
Does it mean that it's GMO? This is GMO free, so the seeds are not genetically, no son transgénicas.
No. This is organic. No.
Son baseadas en los pequeños agricultores.
Yes. Now is transgenical, but it is changing in the organic cotton.
Okay. But usted no me ha contestado la cuestión de cuáles son los drivers, cuáles son las fuerzas que van a mover todos los clusters para se quedar juntos.
The policies, the politics, the external force to take para exportar, to take exportation, son fuerzas que, o sea, que van a obligar, digamos, a ir cambiando la política y la forma, digamos, de producción. ¿Se entendió?
¿Hay otras cuestiones, por favor? Tenemos muchas personas acá hoy. Tenemos 15 personas. No hay más preguntas a hacer.
Yep.
No more questions?
Hi, Jose. This is Travis. I have sort of a broad question for all of the presenters. First, thank you for these presentations. And it relates to how the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of led to some very broad changes in the way that we think about the role of science and the role of government and things like international trade and international relationships. And I guess my question is just, what opportunities do you feel like the present pandemic has opened that relates to your work, and what additional challenges are now posed And these can be things related to now we trust government more, now we trust government less. Now we trust science more. Now there are those who question science more. What do you see as the opportunities and the challenges that are opening now?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the questions? Like
Sure.
opportunities for science.
So for example, a year ago, the proposal for a new tax that might yield a double dividend.
Yeah, well,
had a very different meaning than today.
Yeah, sure,
when now our attention is elsewhere.
No. I mean, in the case of our investigation, now with the global pandemic, like Argentina is now like from the government, they are making like a lot of efforts to help people, and they came back to subsidies for energy consumption and all that type of stuff. So we're taking a step back from going towards a greener way of living. I mean, yeah, no, our attention is not there for sure. I don't know if,
yeah.
I had a question also for Micaela specifically. I was curious if could you have applied a different model to the issue at hand? Could you have looked at a different model? If so, do you think you would have gotten a different result?
When I was preparing my thesis and I had to read a lot about a double dividend and fiscal environmental policies, almost all of them were made on CGE models. So it's like a very usual technique and model for this type of analysis. However, we didn't have enough time to prepare that. I mean, it would have gone forever. And also, I think that maybe in our university, we don't have like the resources to learn that maybe in our classes. So you have to dig on it separately. So yeah, for sure, I could have done it with a CGE model, or maybe in fact a dynamic input-output model. I think that if I had done it with a CGE model, I could have introduced a lot of other effects that with the input-output model I couldn't, and maybe I might have gotten different results, but I don't know, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Was it's shorter than others because we have only 3 presenters. If anyone has a new question, we come to an end. I have to thank you for the presentations and thank you to come to ICABR. We hope to have next year the possibility, but I don't. A little bit skeptical about the possibilities to have a different conference than we have had this year. The problem is one point that is good, that I have the opportunity to catch up with the people from this zone, because the ICABR in Latin America was basically Brazil. I don't know why. I think that because some guys went there and called people to go. And we miss people from the other countries because the contributions are excellent. Thank you for all the presentations, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity. I think that this conference has created the suggestion to make this Latin American meetings more frequently. We have the opportunity to join ourselves regarding this important subjects in the economy. The fact that when we get started 20 years ago or more than 20 years, as the subjects of ICABR are a little bit specialized subjects from these crazy guys that that know things about genetics, know things about genomics and the impacts of transgenic crops. And now we've seen that all of these things that we have done are nowadays are very important to all the mankind, the survival of humanity. Okay, are subjects that are very relevant. I think that we deal today for 3 different subjects, but are very important from the. I think that the presentation from Ecuador is related to how to improve the quality of life of smallholders, giving them opportunities to produce things that has in the value chain that added value. Okay, that to escape from this destiny to produce some staple foods that are not valuable in the market. And then it's very important to provide them more productivity. And there are possibilities to give them more productivity without changing their way of lives and having sharp transformations that we have had in Brazil that are terrible. And then thank you, Tamara. I hope that your region, that Chaco, is very important to Argentina, that has the opportunity to reach some higher levels of development. And then I think that this clusterization is important. And Paula, excellent job. Maria, Priscilla, thank you for our intervention. That was very enlightening. Okay.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yes, it's amazing that we're very happy to know that in other countries we have similar things that you are doing, and you never had the opportunity to know this. Okay.
Yes, we have common problems. That's the problem. Yeah. That's the issue.
One thing that's why the Brazilian universities, they publish a lot. University of São Paulo, one of the main number of publications in the world, but the fact that the impact is low.
Yeah.
I said that we publish garbage. These publications are not good. I don't think so, because the University of São Paulo is very good. The problem is that the diffusion is terrible. They publish in some journals, local journals in Portuguese and things like this. So you have to have this opportunity to catch up and make a better
yes,
diffusion.
You need to have a publication, Latin American publication, but with an international diffusion.
Yes.
Yes.
No, the problem, sometimes you have problems like Tamara's problem, that if you try to publish in other countries, okay, you have to focus in more
general.
Yes, a broad subject, and then try to convince them that this is a general problem in economy. Economists has this problem. Sometimes we have to prove that your ideas are general ideas. No, they're not.
Yeah.
General ideas. You are not proving that carbon tax does not work. You are showing to us that carbon tax are important. Okay, then it's a policy that you can take in account if you want to reduce emissions. That's why this to take in account the rebound effect is important. Double taxation, double dividend is important.
Yes, of course.
Thank
For
you.
Our economies is important. Yes. Thank you.
If you want to talk a little bit more, one of you, please do it. If you don't, we go home, because I am in my office. I have the privilege to live very close to my office, and then I come today at 7 o'clock and stay here up to 10 o'clock every day, because at the home you have a lot of people working, and then it's impossible to work there. Okay. Thank you all, and I hope that in the next year we have a commitment that you have to present new papers and the follow-ups of the papers that you have presented today. Okay? See you guys in the next year. I don't know if in Ravelo. Ravelo is a beautiful place. Okay. Please go to Ravelo. Cross fingers to go to Ravelo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Travis.
He left. Thank you all. Thank you.
Hi, Diego. It was nice to meet you again. Hi,
nice
Tamara.
talking to you again, and hopefully next year it's ya sea in Italia.
You are ICABR guard, if I understood you are.
Dios quiera, Dios quiera.
Okay.
Saludos.
Thank you.
Ciao. Bye.
Ciao, ciao. See you later, if it's possible.
Thank you.